Well, what are friends for if they won't cut you a gift check for 90 grand? That's what the Prime Minister's office wants us to believe was behind Nigel Wright's backroom $90,000 handover to a needy and besieged and now independent Senator Mike Duffy. Not many people seem to be buying the story, and the longer it plays, the uglier it seems to get. Bruce is in Ottawa tonight, as is Jennifer Ditchburn of Canadian Press. Andrew is here in Toronto, and if you're wondering where Chantal is, she's on a plane somewhere between Toronto and Ottawa at this time, so we'll miss her this evening. All right, after 48 hours, there is, in fact, a body under the bus, and it's Mike Duffy's, and he says he went there all by himself, and it was nobody pushed him there. What do you make of that, Andrew?
I don't really believe it. I think he'd become a liability, an embarrassment, whatever word you want to use, for the party, and in the ruthless way that politics has, they've now pushed him overboard. These are the same people who were quite willing and happy to welcome him into their ridings when it was fundraising time, but they're now shocked to discover that he's been campaigning on the public dime. Unless I miss my guess, that's why he was put in the Senate. So it's a little bit late for them to be doing this, but it's a pretty transparent attempt at damage control. It doesn't change any of the fundamental facts of the story, either in terms of his own impropriety and claiming expenses he wasn't entitled to, or this grotesque error of judgment on the part of the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff in paying them this enormous payout.
Will it work as damage control, Bruce?
No, I don't think it will, Peter. I think this is an attempt by the Conservatives to try to wrestle some control over this story, which is really out of control. It's easily the most serious ethical challenge I think they've faced in their time in office. I think that's true because it goes to the very highest office within the Prime Minister's office, and there are so many questions that remain unresolved, unanswered, just by virtue of this repositioning of Senator Duffy. I think that it actually raises some new questions, like what did Nigel Wright actually get for his $90,000?
All right, I just want to get Jennifer's impression of tonight's events, though, because Jennifer, you've been working hard on this story, breaking some of the news in it. What does the Duffy departure from the Conservative caucus achieve for the Conservatives tonight?
Well, I think they can finally separate themselves from Senator Duffy a little bit, which is actually what they're saying, that he will have to answer some of the questions surrounding his expenses. But my question is, why were you so uncurious about his expenses before? Because, of course, it was just a week ago when the Conservative Senate leader, Marjorie Le Breton, was telling us all the matter was closed. They refused to open the books. And just from a little journalistic sleuthing from some of us on the Hill, we were able to come up with the fact that he was campaigning for the Conservative Party and also claiming some Senate expenses. So, again, I come back to this question. Why did you back this person for so long, and why didn't you go to the bottom of his expenses to find out exactly what he was doing during that period of time?
Well, what is the answer to that question? What was it about Mike Duffy that kept the Conservatives so much in his camp and doing backflips to protect him, including getting a check for $90,000 from the Chief of Staff? Andrew.
Well, it certainly raises that question when you see these kinds of backroom deals. And was it the facts of his own expenses were embarrassing? They didn't want those to come out, because certainly as we've been coming them out, you know, in dribs and drabs in the media, they've become more and more embarrassing and intriguing from that standpoint. Was it things that he knew about the party that he was, you know, would be able to tell if he was freed from the sort of party yoke? Who knows? When you see people behaving in a suspicious way, it raises suspicions. And so if you're in a high public office, you have an obligation not to behave in a way that raises those suspicions. Even if there was some innocent explanation, and I scratch my head trying to think what it would be for the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff to be paying a sitting legislator $90,000 in the middle of a forensic audit. Even if there's some innocent explanation for that, you should have enough sense of how the reasonable person would see that not to go there. And why either party got into this remains a mystery and a puzzle.
Bruce?
Well, and the longer the clock ticks without the delivery of this innocent explanation, I think the more problematic it is for the Prime Minister and for his Chief of Staff. You know, I think it's fairly obvious that when that meeting happened, which probably shouldn't have happened from the standpoint of how it appears that the government was maybe involving itself in a process that they should have kept some distance from. But when that meeting happened, Mr. Wright, who by all accounts is an extraordinarily smart person and an extraordinarily good person from most of the people I know who are his friends, he had choices available to him. The only choice that he made was to cut a check for $90,000. Presumably, he could have said to Mr. Duffy, pay the money back or leave our caucus. And of course, he's now paid the money to Mr. Duffy. Mr. Duffy has left the caucus, saying that he wants to rejoin the Conservative Party and Conservative caucus at some point. So that distance actually isn't really accomplished. And as I said before, I think more questions are raised now rather than fewer.
Let me play you a clip from Stephen Harper from 2005. Actually, it was just the beginning of that campaign that he won. The campaign stretched over Christmas into 2006. This is from the first speech he gave. It's one of the first promises he made. Watch this.
There will be a new code on Parliament Hill. Bend the rules, you will be punished. Break the law, you will be charged. Abuse the public trust, you will go to prison. If you behave unethically or dishonestly, then do not expect a reward from this Prime Minister of Canada.
So there you go, a little over 7 years ago. How do you square that promise, Jennifer, with what's happened now?
Well, there's the heart of the problem. You come to power saying that you're going to do things differently, and then you have a millionaire in the Prime Minister's office cutting a $90,000 check to a senator who makes $132,000 a year, and I'm not even going into the pension and so on. So that, I would think, runs contrary to everything that the Conservatives said that they would do, and it would, I would think, rankle a lot of rank-and-file Conservatives who would look askance at this. And you know, already today, I think you could feel the temperature changing around Ottawa, with some Conservatives behind the scenes grumbling about what this was doing to their reputation and why can't this story just go away. So you know, the writing was on the wall, but we still have that string of Nigel Wright. And so I agree with Andrew and Bruce that this is going to continue, and there's so many more questions that haven't been answered.
Andrew?
You know, it's of a piece in a way with all of the other principles and policies and promises that they've abandoned over the years. That is to say, once you get in the habit of saying everything's okay, everything's negotiable, everything is contingent, once you get into that, you're seduced into that constant compromise, nothing's fixed, nothing's a fixed principle, I don't think we should be entirely surprised if ethics and accountability become the latest casualty in that. You know, Duffy, in his statement that he released this evening, said, you know, I hope to rejoin after these questions are resolved. Well, what would be the method for resolving these questions? They shut down the audit after he received the $90,000. There was the whitewash of his conduct in the Senate committee. And since this story is broken about the $90,000 payment, we've had 4 or 6 different explanations, none of which make sense, many of them conflicting with each other, and not a single document to back up any of it. So where's the process for resolving these questions, or are we just going to continue to have it done by leaks and anonymous sources picking up reporters inside corridors?
You know, the Conservative who has been pushed in front of the cameras in the last couple of days to try and explain this one is Pierre Poilievre, who is often put in that position of trying to defend things that the government has done, and he's quite an effective at times speaker on political panels and that in the afternoon. Here's what he said. This was yesterday on Evan Solomon's show. This was his explanation for Nigel Wright cutting that check for Senator Mike Duffy. Watch this.
So what we have here is that Nigel Wright did an exceptionally honorable thing. He reached into his own resources, wrote a personal check out of his own bank account to cover the costs of these ineligible expenses and to protect taxpayers.
So that's what it was about. It was protecting taxpayers. Does that kind of spin line work, Bruce?
Well, it works, but it works for the other parties. You know, arguably, Pierre Poilievre is the leader in own goal scoring in Canadian politics and has been for a couple of years now. He's doing devastating damage to the Conservative brand every time they put him out here. It's a good thing and a good day for the Conservatives if not very many people hear what he has to say. If you contrast that statement that the Prime Minister made that you showed the clip of a few moments ago, Peter, which is very strong, easy for Canadians to understand what he implied by those words, with the kinds of things that Mr. Poilievre has been saying about leadership and character and doing the right thing by Canadian taxpayers, it's not just that these things don't add up together, it's that the second is offensive to the value system of many Conservatives, and Jennifer made allusion to this, but I've spent some time in the city in the last couple of days, and I've talked to a lot of Conservatives. I have yet to meet one who's comfortable with the decisions that were made either by Mr. Wright or with respect to Mr. Duffy.
You know, that's one of the things that these past 48 hours have been different in terms of other kind of political crises of the past couple of years, on Twitter, if you use it as a guideline, Twitter often brings the partisan nature of politics out, and you hear from both sides, and they're quite aggressive about their stand. On this one, the right, the conservative side, has been relatively quiet. Not silent, but relatively quiet compared with the past. So this must be, one would assume, hurting the base. They must be really upset about this. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, if this is the story that they're telling that's supposed to make it go away, you sort of wonder what on earth could be the real story, because the story they're telling is so ridiculous. I mean, in what backwoods hick town would this be the appropriate way of resolving the situation? You know, don't worry about your fraudulently claimed expenses. We'll get Billy Bob to cut you a check. It's what do they take us for? It's so ridiculous. This is a G7 country. This isn't Dog Patch.
Billy Bob. Now, you went to school with Billy Bob in this case.
That's part of the as I say, the mystery of this is these are supposedly sophisticated, decent people, at least in Nigel's case. It is, you know, one wants to withhold judgment to some extent until we find out the facts of this case, rather than these 6 different ever-shifting cockamamie stories we're being told about how, you know, Duffy was afraid of dropping dead tomorrow.
Jennifer?
Well, I just wanted to pick up on the Pierre Poilievre quote that you used, because in that he's saying that Mr. Wright did an honorable thing. Now, that's a lot different than what we first heard from the Prime Minister's office, which was this is a personal check from Mr. Wright to a buddy that was in trouble. When you start to say that this was to protect the taxpayers, that means the Prime Minister's office is implicated in the whole affair. There's a political decision that was taken by Mr. Wright in some form or another to make this go away so that the taxpayer wouldn't be on the hook. And I think that's sort of one of the main problems here. This wasn't just a thing between friends. This was something that accomplished a political imperative.
Where's the story heading, Bruce? I mean, it happens to the Conservatives on a week when the House isn't sitting. If you got to deal with bad news, it's probably a good time to have it happen. When the House isn't sitting, the opposition can't really get at it. So they're just, one assumes, hoping to get to the end of the week. Is this a kind of weak story? Like, is this over in a couple of days, or is this one we're going to be hearing more on this for a while?
Well, it will be a failure of our democratic system if it is over within a few days, in my view. I think we've seen several instances over recent years of issues that might have caused more calamitous public response and more serious consequences for government to really kind of go by the wayside because people lost attentiveness to the issues. I think this is a very serious one. I think this one needs to have a light shone on what actually happened, much more so than the PMO has been willing to do so far. It may well be that there are better explanations for what happened than the ones that are on record now, but the ones that are on record now should not be accepted by the media and by opposition politicians who should pursue this issue further, I think.
The trouble is, though, when the story keeps changing every 24 hours, you know, it gets harder and harder to believe whatever the latest story that comes out. Andrew, you on this as well?
Well, that's why we need to see, among other things, some documentation. I'd like to see the check that was written to see whose account it was actually drawn on. We're told it was Nigel Wright's. Let's see if that's true. At this point, when you heard so many stories, you know, they were old friends. No, they only barely knew each other, or it was a loan. No, it was a check. There's so many stories floating out of there. Nobody taking accountability. Nobody going on the record. Absolutely, the opposition needs to look. This is part of the general problem in this country of a lack of accountability mechanism. We've talked many times in this program of when people do something wrong, it's so hard to hold them to account.
All right, we're going to leave it at that for this week, but something tells me that we may be talking about it again. Jennifer, great to have you with us this week.
Thank you.
Bruce is in Ottawa, Andrew here in Toronto.